Lecture 7, Overview of Corporate Governance. Overview of Corporate Governance. And the issues will be focusing on this, the meaning of corporate governance, basic principles of corporate governance, issues in corporate governance, the importance of corporate governance, the mechanisms of corporate governance, and the concept of good corporate governance. Indeed, once we know corporate governance in its entirety, that really will address the issue about good corporate governance. All right. So what brought about the need for this corporate governance then? It is coming from the problem known as the agency problem. Most of the time, the people that invest money into setting up business organizations, and here we are not talking about small businesses or self-employed type of businesses. We are talking about medium to large businesses where the investors or the people that have contributed money into the formation of the company may not necessarily be those that will be managing the company. Okay, so you set up a business because whether you won't have time or because you like the skills of management, you then have to hire competent people to come and manage the business on your behalf. When that happens, there is what is known as the agency problem, because the principal, who is the owner of the business in quote, or the company in quote, will have to rely on a third party, an agent, to be able to take decisions on his behalf. Okay, and once you are not the very person who will be in charge of taking the decisions, that actually creates a problem. Okay, the pain that you went through, the toil that you went through in getting your money, the person who come and take charge of that activity, if it's not God-fearing, in quotes, person, there is a tendency that is likely to abuse your resources or the monies that you have invested into that particular business. Okay, so that creates what is known as agency problem. The best way to relate with this concept is if you have ever bought a taxi before in Ghana. Okay, anybody with that experience? If you're a taxi owner, let me know whether right now or you've had that experience before, owning the taxi and dealing with taxi drivers. Anybody? Oh, okay, that's fine. But you've heard people complain about the attitude of taxi drivers, right? Sometimes if you see the taxi driver using your car, you may have a running stomach, okay, because of the way he will load the car and the way he will deal with the car. Why? Because he wasn't really the person who taught to be able to save money to buy the car. Okay, so that creates a situation where the agent might behave in a way that is adherent to the interest of the owner of this particular business or the car in the case of our example. All right. So the idea of corporate governance is to improve relationship and interactions with various stakeholders. All right. So once you set up a company, there will be several people that will be interested. So far, we've just looked at the principal, who we can loosely refer to as the owners, management, who we can refer to as the agents that will be acting on behalf of the principal. But beside management, you know the business will have to employ employees. Besides employees, the business will be dealing with customers. Besides customers, the business will be located in a community. Okay, and the list goes on and on and on. So the other thing is that with a good corporate governance, the owners or the investors will only want the funds or all the profits to be paid to them. So corporate governance is there to ensure that not just the principal or management is catered for, but all the other stakeholders of the businesses are equally given attention. Okay, so it is concerned with the method in which owners, lenders to firms ensure that they receive return on their investment. That's the principal thing that we established in the beginning. So before the business can even go ahead and be thinking about other stakeholders, it is important that there is some return for the investors or the lenders or the owners of the business. All right. So whenever I'm teaching CSR, the fundamental thing we have to know is that the company must first and foremost be profitable. It is out of the profit that the other activities of CSR will be embarked upon. So you don't actually run into losses and still undertake CSR activities. If you do that, you are being irresponsible as a manager. So at the core of good corporate governance is to ensure that the company is profitable and some returns are paid to the owners or the lenders or the investors of the business or the company that was set up. Generally, it refers to the system of rules, regulations, and practices for making corporate decisions. If you remember my intro to our ethics class, I said to ensure that companies are properly managed or governed, we have the admonition aspect, the counseling aspect, which is catered for by ethics. And that is what we started with. Okay, then we have the legal aspect, the rules and regulations aspect. And I told you then that that aspect is dealt with under corporate governance. Okay, so corporate governance ensures strict adherence to certain rules and regulations to ensure that the resources of the organizations are not abused. So the law aspects of ensuring that companies are properly managed is catered for under corporate governance. All right. There are several definitions of corporate governance, but let's take these two popular ones because they hold divergent opinion. That is very important for us to understand. All right. So the first one by Milton Friedman. He says corporate governance is to conduct the business in accordance with the owners or shareholders' desire, who generally will be to make as much money as possible while confronting the basic rules of society embodied in law and local customs. So what basically Milton Friedman is seeking to emphasize is that corporate governance is generally about catering for the well-being of shareholders or owners of the business. Okay. And in doing so, pay attention to laws, societal laws, and local customs. But the whole idea of Milton is that it's coming from capitalism. The reason why people invest their resources is because they want to make as much money as possible. Okay. But if you define corporate governance from public policy perspective, corporate governance is seen as the process of ensuring a company's survival, expansion, and growth, whilst also holding it accountable for the use of its power and ability to manage other businesses. So within public policy, you see that the focus shifts. If you read the last aspect, it's about holding businesses accountable for the use of their power and ability to manage other businesses. The ability to manage other businesses is not referring to other companies, okay? But the other stakeholders that the business will be dealing with. It is very, very important that the company or the business is able to manage these other businesses, other stakeholders. All right. So, but also know that under public policy, the fact that the company should be held accountable and should use its power properly and address the interests of other stakeholders doesn't mean the company should collapse. It is still interested in the company's survival, expansion, and growth. But the emphasis on the public policy is the accountability, where you don't just set up a business or a company, run the company for the sole purpose of making profit. But you have to be held accountable and make sure that the interests of other stakeholders are properly catered for. So Milton's definition, even though there is something about law and local custom, that is not the emphasis. The emphasis there is to make as much money as possible to shareholders. When we come to public policy, even though there is issue about survival, expansion, and growth, that is not really the emphasis there. The emphasis is to make sure that companies and businesses are held accountable for their actions and decisions. All right. Underpinning all of this is observance or obedience of the law, rules, and regulations that governs how businesses are governed. All right. So there are some basic principles of corporate governance. If you claim to be a company that is governed properly based on the tenets of corporate governance, these principles are supposed to be obvious, or people should see them in your organization. So the first one is the principle of fairness. It says treat all shareholders fairly, including minority and foreign shareholders, as well as other stakeholders like employees and the local community and customers. So we've explained this much earlier. So the principle of fairness says, even though the shareholders might have been those who contributed money in the formation of the company, once a company is formed, it is no longer only for the shareholders. We have other stakeholders in the company. In fact, and even within the context of shareholders can discriminate among themselves. Okay, because we have what is known as majority shareholders and we have minority shareholders. All right, if you're into buying capital market, buying of shares, you get to know what you can relate to what I'm talking about. Okay, so some people, if voting is based on number of shares, they always get their way with that. Whatever they want, they can make that decision because they have the majority of shares in the company. When that happens, the interests of minority shareholders are normally undermined. So the principle of corporate governance is to make sure that you treat both majority and minority shareholders fairly. All right. Most of the time, this majority shareholders tends to be institutional investors. Okay. So then, for example, if you take dividend payments, normally those that will be craving for payments of dividends will be the minority shareholders. They turn out to be individuals that need money for butter and bread issues. But these institutional shareholders, what they are likely to be more interested in is the growth of the stock. So whether the company declares dividends or not, it doesn't really worry them that much, because almost every month or every day, they have people pouring in money into the mutual funds and so on and so forth. But minority shareholders need these dividends to be able to make their daily decisions. With a proper corporate governance, there will always be votes that will favor, for example, the deferment of payment of dividends, because institutional and majority shareholders really don't really care whether dividends are paid or not. In fact, what they want is for the company to expand and grow and for the share value to go up and so on and so forth. All right. So that is the idea of corporate governance. Principle of fairness. All the stakeholders must be treated fairly, not just the shareholders of the company. Then it's also hinged on the principle of transparency. It says openness and the desire to give shareholders and other stakeholders comprehensive information about all elements of how businesses are conducted. So how the business is conducted, it is important that you make the information available to shareholders and all other stakeholders. If you remember, we said the reason why corporate governance started in the first place was because of agency problem. The fact that the agent might act in a way that will conflict with the interests of the shareholder. And normally this only takes place when there is no transparency. The principal or the investor or the shareholder doesn't get to know what is happening. And so the agent can take advantage of that. But with transparency, whatever information that the agent has, the principal also tends to have the same thing, and that will cater for all kinds of abuses that might be occurring on the part of the agent. Okay, and it's not just shareholders, all the stakeholders must be given sufficient information. And that is why under company law, there will be a requirement for annual public preparation and publication of financial statements of companies, so that all stakeholders will get to know how the company is properly governed. Okay. So these are the principles that the private sector and even NGOs are trying to establish. All right. There are some churches, today is Sunday, the following week, Sunday, they will actually come to announce the offerings that were taken in terms of tithe and everything. We had this, we had that, and so on and so forth. All right. There are also churches that after the close of service, the pastor just take all the money and carry it into his boots and runs away. All right. So that will tell you these principles are not just for businesses, but for all type of organizations. If you want to ensure that the organization is properly managed, you have to ensure transparency. Okay. Then we have the principle of accountability. So very close to the idea of transparency. The obligation and responsibility to explain or justify the company's activities and behavior. All right. So those that are in charge, the management, must be prepared to come and give an account of why they made certain decisions and how the resources of the organizations were used. All right. So if you're an organization and the manager or the people in charge are not willing to give an account to anybody, then you should know that the company or the organization is not properly being governed. Proper governance calls for accountability. If you are certain you are doing the right thing, then you shouldn't be afraid to hold yourself accountable, to allow others to hold you accountable, and so on and so forth. So whenever there is the fear of accountability, it should give you a clue that something probably isn't happening right or going on right. Okay. If you go back to our church example as well, even in those, and I'll rely more on the church because most of the time when we talk about corporate governance, we think it should only be companies or profit-making organizations. The principles can be applied everywhere. Okay, so we have some churches that at the end of the year, they always have a particular man that they come to give an account of how much money were received during the year, the projects that were undertaken, blah, 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 and so on and so forth, for everybody to know how the funds of the church were being used. All right. And we have other churches that won't ever do that. Okay. They won't ever do that. Come and give an account of how the resources of the church are being used. All right. So that is the underpinning of proper corporate governance, the willingness to be held accountable. All right. Then we have fiduciary principle. The directors who are the agents of the shareholders who invested money and own the organization must act with trust while carrying out their tasks. So we've just introduced another element that we'll go into much deeper later. I think there is a whole chapter on that. Okay. So first and foremost, we establish what is known as the agency problem. The people that invest money are not the same guys that will be running the company. They need agents, and the agents have the tendency of abusing the resources. All right. To help these shareholders, I said, because they might not have the expertise or the time, might not be the same guys running the company. Okay. So they need people that will police or supervise the activities of this management. So they will appoint what we call directors or board of directors that will supervise the activities of this management of the company to ensure that the decisions that will be taken will be in the interest of the shareholders and not the management of the company. Okay, that is where this principle is coming from. So if the directors also go there and they fail in their duty of fiduciary basically means you are also acting on behalf of somebody and you must exercise utmost good faith in doing that particular assignment. So the shareholder says, I cannot be there to foresee, or I lack the knowledge to be able to know whether the management of my business is doing the right thing. Therefore, I'm appointing you to monitor and supervise and take control of what management is doing. Okay, there is a tendency for these directors to also go there and go and form an alliance with the management of the company in order to misuse the resources of the shareholders of the company. If that happens, they are abusing the fiduciary principle of corporate governance. They must act in good faith, they must act in trust, whilst carrying out their duties as directors. So that's where the fiduciary principle is coming from. And you know it's a legal thing. All right. Once you are appointed to act on behalf of somebody in law, you are supposed to act in utmost good faith. Okay. Then there is the principle of reliability coming from the same discussion. It focuses on honoring the words and commitment of directors to all stakeholders. Okay. So we're not talking much about directors, but they play a key role in ensuring proper corporate governance, because as I've just explained, the shareholders, or loosely called the owners of the company, will not be there all the time. They don't have the expertise, and so they rely on you, the director. So it's important that you are reliable. Whatever information that you give should be accurate, because they are largely dependent on what you say. Okay. Then we have the principle of dignity. It's almost like the first principle of fairness. To respect all stakeholders' interests and privileges. Minority shareholders are the most vulnerable groups in corporate organizations and need protection. So I've explained this point already. Even within the context of shareholders, we could have majority and minority shareholders. And there is always the tendency that majority shareholders could be taking some decisions that will affect minority shareholders. Corporate governance wants to ensure the principle of dignity. All shareholders should be treated fairly, not just even shareholders. All the stakeholders' rights and privileges must be protected. Okay. Then there is the principle of propriety. At the end of the day, the resources or the assets of the company actually belongs to shareholders. All right. So shareholders are the ultimate owners of corporate property. Corporate governance places a premium on protecting the interest of shareholders. So that's the whole idea of corporate governance. All right. We will be addressing, or it will help in addressing the interests of all other stakeholders. But at the heart of it is the protection of the interests of shareholders. In fact, that is what the word survival comes in, even the definition of corporate governance under public policy. Until the interests of shareholders are protected, the survival of the organization itself is not guaranteed. Okay, so one of the principles of corporate governance is to ensure propriety. The assets, the interests of shareholders need to be guarded and protected at all times. All right. Once that is done successfully, then it can then escalate or move. We can now move on to addressing the interests of all the other stakeholders of the company. Then the last bit, which is related to responsiveness, to respond to societal requirements in an efficient and effective manner. So yes, we have to protect shareholders, their interests, but that is not the end. We have the concept of corporate citizenship, where you are not just there to take from society, but you are also there to address the needs of society. So one of the underlying principles of corporate governance is to be responsive to the needs of the society and the community within which you operate. Okay. So those are the general ones. We have OECD. Is an organization that is known largely for its stance on good corporate governance. So they have also their principles that are similar to what we just explained. So I'll just run you through them. So the rights of stakeholders, we've explained that is about protecting the rights of stakeholders. Equitable treatment of shareholders, we've explained that. Then what OECD is calling for is the role of stakeholders in corporate governance. So not just directors, But OECD is now championing the situation where other stakeholders of the company will take much more interest. All right. We have the concept of shareholder activism now, where unlike time past where shareholders may just invest and go and sit somewhere, now they want to take active part in the running of the company. And that is one of the OECD requirements of good corporate governance, all right? Involvement of other stakeholders, not just the directors. Disclosure and transparency, we can explain that. And OECD also emphasizes on the responsibility of the board. Okay, at the heart of good corporate governance is the presence of good boards. Because as we said, if you leave management alone, they have the high possibility of doing things that will be at the disadvantage of shareholders. Okay, so OECD emphasizes and places premium on the roles that boards are supposed to play in the proper governance of organizations. All right. Once again, we come to the church example. All right. So the reason why we have the church board is also to prevent the tendency where some pastors may want to abuse the resources of church members. All right. They are human beings. At best, men of God are still men, women of God are still men. And they have all the tendencies that we have. And so there is the need for, say, a church board to ensure that the monies that come, they don't see those monies as their personal monies and use them for things that they want, but things that will benefit the majority of people in the church. Okay. The problem with most churches is that most of the time, these board members are handpicked by the pastor himself. And they are people that he knows that whatever decision or whatever he wants, these guys are likely to approve for him. Okay, so the accountability bit that we spoke about, the transparency bit that we spoke about, doesn't really come to fore in church administration. All right, they just pick people that will always say yes to them, and so they get to spend money and get to do whatever they want, because they normally will even instill fear in you that they are men of God, you don't have to challenge them, and so on and so forth. All right, so I want this topic to sink in, and it's the church. I want to assume most of us are church guys, so these examples will help you to relate better. But these are real things that are happening when it comes to church administration. All right. So there are decisions when you hear of, you ask yourself whether there is a church board and what is the role of the church board in all of these things. Okay. So what we've done so far is to look at the principles. A part of the principles is OECD, the known body that regulates globally corporate governance issues. So these are principles that underpin proper corporate governance. I want to pause here and ask if there are any questions, any clarifications, any suggestions, any contribution before we continue with the issues. The hand button is there, so if you want to talk, you can click on it and let me hear from you. Yes, Gilbert.
Prof, please, I want to know the meaning of the OECD.
So it's Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development or something like that. Okay. If you just Google it, it's a popular organization. So it's an Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development or something of that sort. Very close to that. So Google and let's confirm. Economic cooperation. Yes, any other clarification? Kabiru.
So, Prof, thank you. So on the issue of CSR, as you spoke about, it is only when a company or business makes profit, that is when they can undertake CSR.
Yes, that should be the rational thing. Okay, so if you study Carroll's pyramid, you must actually satisfy the economic responsibility of the organization before you move to philanthropy. All right. So it will not make sense for you to be running into losses and still be wasting the resources of the organization into CSR.
Okay.
Okay. Any other?
Prof,
Yeah.
Prof, what if it's a new organization? Because he said you cannot be running a company making losses and you still continue to run the company. What if it's a new company? Because mostly new companies, we don't estimate profit immediately. There are sometimes you either go to the equilibrium, as in break even. If you don't make loss, you can break even. What if it's a new company?
Mr. Why you didn't hear his question or you didn't listen to him? He was asking, I said the fundamental thing is to make profit before you engage in CSR.
Oh, okay.
So he wanted to know whether a company should engage in CSR when they are making losses.
Oh, okay.
All
but
right.
sir, you said from the beginning that's what I'm saying. If it is a new company.
No, from the beginning, what did I say there?
No, I'm saying you said we shouldn't continue. I'm saying, what if it is a new company?
No. I'm not saying you shouldn't continue. I said you cannot be giving out or engaging in CSR from the beginning when the company is not profitable.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Naturally, all businesses, you don't start a business making profit.
Yes.
Always some curve. Is it J curve or something? All right. When you start, you go down before you start coming up. You break even, then you start making profit.
Yes.
So yes, so the ability to take losses in the initial years is part of the way to ensure that companies are properly run. You must have the stability to endure those periods, break even before you can take off. All right. So his question was, during the period of even making the losses, will it still be prudent to be engaged in CSR?
Yes, I was saying that if it is a new company, as you said, then I think the company can continue.
Can continue doing what?
Operating or engaging. Engage. I've forgotten the people you said.
Mr. Do you know the meaning of CSR? Corporate social responsibility.
You can't engage them. You only engage them when you have excess profit.
They are not people.
Yes, I know. Our responsibility.
Yes.
The responsibility you owe to the community.
Exactly. So you cannot start with CSR when you are still down there making losses.
Yes, please.
Okay. So it is only when the company becomes. So look, I think we'll treat CSR in our last topic or thereabout. All right. But just go and check on Carroll's pyramid, CSR pyramid. Okay. He gives ranks when you start as a business where you should focus on economic responsibility, legal, ethical, philanthropic. All right. So you don't start with philanthropy. You start making sure that the company actually survives before you can start thinking about profit. All right. Gilbert, have you checked OECD?
Prof.
Yes, bro, I've checked.
What is the full meaning?
The full meaning is Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development.
Okay. Right.
Yes, please.
Prof.
Yes.
Please, is it a sequence? What you said, the economic, the philanthropy, is it a step, a process that you have to go through? Oh,
yes,
okay.
It's a process.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So read on the pyramid. Yes. Any other issue?
Prof, my hand is up again.
You didn't click. I can't see your hand. So I said click on that icon.
It's there.
Okay, you talk. I can't see it.
Prof, I'm looking at your first definition in respect of Milton Friedman.
Yeah.
Which says that corporate governance is to conduct the business in accordance with the owners or shareholders' desire. That is my interest. You see, funding a business is different from executing the technicalities. As you said, these people bring their monies together to fund the business, but require to hire people with technical know-how in managing it with the aim of getting profit. Is it always to go by the shareholders' desire, even though they might or may not lead to making profit?
Oh, what he means by their desire here is exactly what we just said. Their desire, the interest of shareholders is to make profit. So basically, the emphasis of the import of that definition is that you must manage the company in such a way that the company becomes profitable. Actually, what he was trying to prevent is to engage in activities that will reduce the profitability of the company, like the CSR thing that we were just talking about. Okay. Are you
okay? Yes, please.
So when he says the desire of shareholders, that's the point he's trying to make, that the main interest of shareholders is to make profit. And so don't use CSR and other things as an excuse to dissipate the resources of the company. All right. Operate rather to meet the desire of shareholders. And that's exactly making of profit.
Okay, thank you.
I hope you're fine. Good.
Yes, I'm fine.
All right. Can we continue? Any other question? Mr. Your hand is still up.
Prof, no question. I'll just.
Okay. Then let's move on to next issue. Issues in corporate governance. So these are the trending stuff or concerns in corporate governance. Distinguishing the roles of board and management. So from my earlier explanations, I've tried to explain to you the distinction. And as simple as it is, it's very, very important for you to know that. Okay. So we have three key parties. We have shareholders, we have management, and we have board. All right. Shareholders loosely are the owners of the company. Management are those that are supposed to manage. The board are supposed to provide oversight responsibility over management. So the board of a company is not the same as the management of the company. All right. The board is not the same. They are supposed to supervise and regulate the activities of the management of the company. And they will be doing so on behalf of the shareholders of the company. Okay. The other distinction we have to notice that boards are not normally in charge in the day-to-day operations of the company. It is management that is supposed to be undertaking the day-to-day activities of the company. But they are supposed to meet, whether annually or quarterly, whatever, in order to make sure that the management of the company is running the company the way it should be run. Okay, so boards do not get engaged in the day-to-day operations, but because they have to approve certain decisions of management, whenever management overly abuse or destroys the company, boards can be held liable by shareholders because they are supposed to be acting on behalf of shareholders. And as I said, there are even the banking crisis, right? There are cases where boards and management just go and agree and decide to whatever, share the resources of the company. If you paid attention to the discussion of the recent banking cleanup, which occurred wasn't in 2017 there, yeah, before all this DDEP came. You heard about, is it Capital Bank? Where the bailout from Bank of Ghana, the management and board decided to give those monies that were given to them by Bank of Ghana as loans at interest rate as low as 2% and 5%. All right. So those are the things that we're talking about. All right. Until all this mess started. So the boards that were supposed to be acting in the best interest of the shareholders of the company, they actually went there and they were in alliance with the management of the company or the bank, and they were destroying the interest of shareholders. Okay, so it is it is something that we have to know when it comes to corporate governance. That as if you become a board member, you are not the same as the management of the company. And therefore, if you are in the good books of management, it doesn't mean you should be fighting management, but it must be a supervisory role. And so if you are always there saying yes, yes, yes to the management of the company, it is possible you are not playing your role well. All right. And the banking crisis, I think Otabil got himself into a bit of trouble with that because of this loan stuff and all those things that happen. So it's very, very important for us to know the distinction between board and management. But Mr. Why your hand is up again?
Prof.
Yeah.
Please, so what are their interests in the company?
Who's
the board and the management?
Oh, but that is why I just said. Management are supposed to be managing the day-to-day operations. The boards are to oversee or supervise the decisions of the management of the company. Okay. And the board members are supposed to be appointed or elected by the shareholders of the company. Okay, to oversee the activities of the management of the company. All right. Yes. Once again, the problem we have in Ghana is that people are appointed onto boards, and these people have no idea of what this corporate governance thing is about. In fact, recently, the new Companies Act requires that before you can become a board member of a bank, you should have taken a course at the tertiary level in corporate governance. So you people are fortunate, you are covered there. All right, because people are currently even on Bank of Ghana boards, whatever board, and they have no clue about the issues that we are discussing this morning. Okay, when the Capital Bank issue came, I think Pastor Mensa Otabil issued a statement, and I felt he should have actually consulted the lawyers in his church or people that have knowledge in corporate governance to guide him in making that decision. Okay, he was of the view that he is not part of management and therefore couldn't be held liable for the activities of the management of the company. But you see, once you accept the role as the director of a company, you are supposed, as I said, most critical decisions of management must be approved by the board. And so if you fail to exercise that oversight role, okay, and management takes decisions that brings the company to its needs or brings certain unexplainable losses to shareholders, the shareholders have the right not to sue management, but to sue you, the director of the company. All right. Yes, some of the cases are in court, so we can't go into the details of that. But the general principle is that as a director, because you were there to supervise, to guide how management will be making decisions. So if you fail in that role and management was to destroy the company, shareholders can hold you liable. So as much as being a director, especially of banks and these other big companies, can be very, very rewarding, you want to be careful before accepting those roles because they come with responsibilities. All right. They come with responsibilities. In company law, we have what is known as lifting the veil or piercing the veil and stuff like that. And they can come after you. Okay. All right. I saw some hand. Are you okay? Yeah. I saw somebody's hand earlier.
Yeah.
Was it Gilbert?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Please, what I know is the board take a decision which is implemented by management, supervised by the managing director of a company. So, well, I'm not aware management take their own decision. What I'm aware is the board make a decision for management to implement.
No, so we have the strategic direction of a company. All right. So boards will decide the long-term vision and direction of the company. but the day-to-day operations and decisions of the company are taken by the management of the company. Okay. So if you're a manager or CEO, if you want to do something, you don't always run to the board and go and ask them, should I be doing this? No. The board will generally provide the overall direction and the strategy of the company. But the day-to-day decisions and management of the company is taken by the management. Okay. Is that fine?
Yes, please. Thanks.
Okay. Idris.
Yes, Prof. I wanted to, this board issue.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a bit complicated in the sense that
some
of the boards are composed just to, to make the company look good in the eyes of the public.
That's right.
And that was the situation where Mensah Otabil found himself. But I want to talk about the BH Capital, where I have a colleague who was a board member.
Right.
And the challenge we have,
just be mindful to speak generally, right? Because as I said,
yes,
they are still under investigations and all that. So,
yeah. So, if you realize that sometimes the board members are handpicked.
Yeah.
And they are handpicked because of their reputation in society.
That's right.
So when you are coming to have a transaction with the bank or with the financial institution, and you hear that Professor Abraham is part of the board, you have that some level of confidence.
That's right.
Oh, my former prof is part of the board, so I can trust the company. But when you go behind the scene, that is not really what the case is.
That's right. That's right.
The case will probably be not for them to have oversight responsibility, but to actually just make the company look good.
That's right. That's right. I agree with you 100%. I agree with you 100%. So it's coming from all the discussions we've had so far. There are people that are on the board with no expertise at all. Okay. I think there is a recent case. I can't remember the name of the person. One woman, she's into either arts or languages or something that is on the board of Bank of Ghana. Okay. I read a story somewhere. And one of the criticism people raised was the kind of contribution that she can make on the board. All right. We'll be talking about that. There is a room for board diversity, but the diversity should not compromise competence and abilities of people that are supposed to be on board. All right. So it's very, very true where people and they play that role though. Say that based on your expertise, somebody like is it Ishmael Janssen? Okay.
Yes.
Janssen was with Unilever, some top companies. And if you have followed the track record of that man, wherever he finds himself, the companies actually perform very well. Okay. So shareholders, for example, may be looking out for his name, whether he's a chair or he's part of the board of a particular company, because they probably trust his judgment and want to follow that. Okay. Adam may be looking at, say, a popular pastor or man of God. The fact that he's a man of God, that means everything will be just and right, and therefore will want to invest in that company and so on and so forth. All right. Yes. So I appreciate that contribution so much. But it moves into the next point. The other issue is the composition of the board and related issues. How boards, please don't just call, click on the button. Okay. When you mention my name like that, you're destroying my thoughts. Okay.
Sorry, sir.
So the composition of the board, as you just explained, is becoming a thorny issue. Who should become a member of the board of a company? Is it just based on the popularity of the person? Should the person have certain expertise? What about board diversity and issues like that? It's becoming a thorny issue under corporate governance. All right. So the person was, I didn't say you can't ask a question. I just said use the button so that I can organize my thought before I bring you in. Okay. The next one is separation of the role of the CEO and the chairperson. Okay, so when you go to the boards, the board also have a chairperson that is supposed to, just like the chairman of a meeting, to govern or take charge of the board's operations. Okay, currently the practice is that for most companies, the CEO, and don't forget the CEO is also the head of management. The CEO is part of the management of the company. In fact, he is the head of the management. And if you remember, we said the board is supposed to govern the activities or supervise the activities of the management of the company. Okay. We have instances where in most companies, the CEO also tends to be the chair of the board of the company. And people see conflict of interest, or corporate governance experts see conflict of interest in that particular direction, such that there is the tendency that oversight responsibility, that supervisory role that the board is supposed to play is likely to be compromised, because the board is supposed to look and assess the work of the CEO. But when they go for board meeting, the person who is supposed to chair now becomes the CEO. All right. So one of the issues that is coming up is that there should be separation. If you are a CEO of a company, you cannot also be the chairperson of the board of the company. Those roles need to be separated to ensure proper accountability, to avoid conflict of interest, and so on and so forth. Okay. Right. Mami Sewa, your hand is up.
Prof, I think you've said by that point I wanted to, the question I wanted to ask, but can the CEO also be part of the board?
Yes. So
you're saying he's supposed to be a chairperson, but can he be part of the board?
Yeah. So I said, I think the next chapter will be on the board proper. So there I will spend a lot of time explaining this thing. Okay.
Okay.
Yes. So if we take the board, we have the executive members of the board. And Marie, I think today your network is disturbing you. You keep going off and coming. Okay. When we get to the board profile, we'll explain these things. Okay. But generally, if you take the board, just a brief explanation. We have executive board members and non-executive. Okay. The CEO falls under the executive board members. When we get to that chapter, I'll spend time explaining that. But yes, the CEO automatically becomes part of the board of a company. Augustine?
Prof, in most of these companies, you see that the CEOs becomes, they are the majority shareholders, or quote unquote, they are the owners of these companies. Then in a situation where other shareholders or minority shareholders, the company run at loss or maybe is bankrupt, who will you hold responsible? Is it the board of the directors or the CEO who you know owns the company, yet he takes the decisions by himself? Because some of the boards are just, let me say, carbonated. They are just there in the name of law that they are board directors, but they don't have a say at all. So in this situation, how do you handle it?
Oh, if that is the case, it's the CEO who has suffered, isn't it? So really, yes, it is he who decided to manage his business that way. So really, he will suffer the consequences. I don't think we should bother ourselves with that. Okay, but I appreciate that particular point. If you go to this, most of the private universities, private staffs, that is what they do. The founder, and I even spoke about churches, especially charismatic churches. All right. The founder of the church just get few guys that he knows he can control and manipulate, and just to meet the requirements of saying that you need a board. Okay. But in the short run, you'll get to do whatever you want, but they don't know that really works against them. In the long run, because you didn't have critical minds to assess your decisions, to critique your decisions, your company ultimately runs aground. And when that happens, you are the loser at the end of the day. Okay. So yes, that thing is also, if you come to publicly owned or listed companies, they by law cannot do some of these things. But normally when you go to this private stuff, yes, a lot of that happens.
Yeah. So sometimes, just as you made mention of lifting of the corporate veil, you do that sometimes, and you see most of the board members are family members, close relatives and friends.
That's right.
So it becomes very difficult. So
that's right.
In terms of legalities or legal issues, for instance, it's difficult because you may say that, okay, the board of directors have the supervisory, mandate over the CEO and other management staff. But here the case, this is the person who owns his business or who is the majority shareholder. He goes to hire people who are close to him and cannot say, or even he has the authority over them. What he says is what they do, instead of the vice versa.
That's right. That's right. So all that I'm saying is that you see, when they start that way, they think, and they get to spend the money the way they want. They get to make any decision they want. In the short run, they think that will help them, right? But in the long run, if the business collapses, who loses? Okay, you have invested a lot of money. So the smart guys, if it is a university, what they do is to get competent professors and just go off. What they might come in to do is to provide funds when the guys make decisions for them to run. Okay, but those who also think they are smart in their own eyes will want to pick people that they can control and manipulate. In the long run, they see the consequences. The unfortunate thing is that sometimes there are also innocent minority shareholders that will suffer. Okay, but if it was just that person, I don't think we have to worry about them at all. Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Wayo, your hand is up.
Bro, please correct me if I'm wrong. From what my friend said, that if the company makes loss, does it mean that when a company makes losses or the company is able to make profit, does it mean that the shareholders can't hold management responsible based on what the CEO has done?
No. You can't. Every investment goes with risk. Let me just put it that way. So yes. You cannot, in the ordinary course of things, hold management liable or CEO liable or board liable for company making losses. No, there is no guarantee that you make profit. What actually is talking about is in the context of fraudulent dealings. Okay. Where the loss is not because of ordinary business practice, but somebody has spent some money somewhere, somebody have defrauded the company somewhere. That is the only circumstance where we're talking. That's the context within which we are talking. Okay. But if a business genuinely make a loss, you cannot hold anybody liable. All right. Those are the risks you have to bear as a business person or investor. Okay. Are we fine? Can we continue?
Yes,
bro.
Okay.
Yes.
Good. So we come to the other issue in corporate governance. Should the board have committees? So others are of the view that the committees will come with extra costs. Others are also of the view that having committees makes the work of a board more efficient. And so that's the other issue of that is of concern in corporate governance. Some of the committees might include nomination committee, and committees are also a major topic, I think chapter 8 that we'll be dealing with, all right? But nomination, when it comes to appointments of key management people, and even some board members or directors, it is up to that committee to pick people to serve on some key management positions. Okay, if the CEO is about retiring or has resigned, that committee will be responsible for getting a new CEO for the company and so on and so forth. Remuneration committee, they will decide the salaries to be paid, okay, to key officers of the company and directors and so on and so forth. Then we have the auditing, we have the risk management. But basically, it's an issue because some are of the view that the board as a whole should perform all these roles, and other scholars are of the view that the committees actually are playing a very important role, and therefore there is the need to divide the board into committees based on the expertise of the people on the board to make sure that the board activities are properly run. Okay. As I said, boards and their committees is another topic. So when we get there, we'll talk much more about that. Then we have the appointments to the board and directors re-election. All right, that is another issue because in theory, shareholders are supposed to be those electing directors of a company. All right. But in reality, what happens is that it is normally the board that will elect directors, like appoint people to be directors of the company and present the names to shareholders during annual AGMs, okay, annual general meetings for their ratification or for them to approve those members for them. So in reality, it looks as if it's not the shareholders really that appoints these directors. It is the board that will come up with some names and they are sent for some voting or some acceptance or some ratification of a sort. So the issue is still there, that when it comes to the appointment of members to the board and directors re-election, do shareholders really play the role that in theory they are supposed to be playing? Okay. Or the current way of doing it is the best way of handling it. So it's another thorny issue in corporate governance.